Hey, this is John Gordon with Positive University, and today my guest is John O'Leary. John, how you doing?
John Gordon, awesome.
Man, we've been friends for a long time. I had you on the podcast when your first book came out called On Fire, right?
That is right.
And now back again because you have a new book coming out. It's called In Awe, right?
It is called In Awe, man. And for those who don't know our backstory, about 12 years ago, I was just starting to speak. And there was an event in St. Louis. A bunch of insurance companies came together. They brought in 3 speakers. The guy who was speaking, kind of like setting the table, just before anybody even showed up in the room, was like a young kid named John O'Leary. And the main event was a couple hours later, a guy named John Gordon. John, that's the first time I heard you speak. It's when I started buying all your books. It's when I fell in love, not only with your message, but the messenger himself. And so, man, I'm honored to be your friend. I love your work, and I'm thrilled to be back on your podcast.
Thanks, John. I appreciate it. I remember you being the warm-up act, but I also remember people just loving your talk more than anything. So I think that was great to see. It was incredible. And I remember watching you going, wow, this guy is really talented. You used PowerPoint and images, and through those images, you create a lot of jokes, had a lot of people laughing. You speak all the time. You're on stages all the time, but not right now because of the pandemic. So how are you doing through this time with your business and as a speaker? How has it been for you?
Hard. I mean, I'd love to say it's been awesome and I'm killing it. The reality is in early March, we lost 94% of future revenue. And so if anyone says they're doing fine through that, they're lying to themselves and to others, and that's not healthy. But I will tell you, we view this as an opportunity. And I don't say that to be Pollyannish. I say it because it's just a fact. We are going to come out organizationally far stronger because of this. And the opportunity we all have every single day of our lives is to utilize the difficulties to propel us forward in a direction we may not have chosen. And so although we may not have chosen to bring everything online like we have, well, now we're here. And what can we do with that? How do you scale yourself going forward globally now? And there really is opportunity. How do you not be the kind of guy who spent the majority of your life on the road in and out of airports and hotel rooms, but being the one that your kids should look up to and finally now can look up to, the one who's sleeping next to your wife every single day, the one making them pancakes every single morning. So, John, this has been a hard season and probably the best season of my professional life.
I think that explains it so well. It's been hard, but yet at the same time, it's been rewarding to be with your family. We're learning so much. I'm going through a lot of the same emotions and feelings as well. You're someone who has faced adversity in your life. You know about coming back and overcoming. Can you talk about what you had to overcome when you were young?
Yeah, I mean, pick your poison, which story you want to have. But I'm assuming you're looking for the one that I speak on frequently. And at age 9, some of your listeners may know, but many don't. At age 9, a guy named John O'Leary was burned on 100% of his body in a household explosion. And so 87% of those burns were 3rd degree. In 2020, in the midst of this pandemic, if a little kid presented with 100% burns, they would take the percentage of the body burns, these are the medical professionals, they would add age, and they would discover mortality. So in 2020, this little guy would have 109% likelihood of passing away, of dying. So John, 33 years ago, there was no earthly chance of this little guy making it through the storm. And yet, those are some of my favorite words, actually, and yet this little guy, man, day 1 in hospital, my dad walks in, and I remember as he approached me thinking, oh my gosh, the only thought I had, my father is going to kill me when he finds out because I'm the one that burned down the house. I'm the one that caused this explosion. And yet instead of approaching me with judgment or anger, he just approached me with love. And the way he greeted me, I think it changed the way I viewed what was happening. Right behind my dad came my mom. She took my right hand. My fingers were burned terribly. They eventually were amputated. She took my hand in hers. She patted my bald head and she says, I love you. So I say, knock it off, Mom. Knock it off with the love. Am I going to die? And her response, I think it changed my life. She said, do you want to die, baby? Do you want to die? Because it's your choice. It's not mine. And I look back, Gordon, and I said, Mama, I do not want to die. I want to live. I want to live. And her response was, good. Then take the hand of God. You walk the journey with him and you fight like you never fought before. John, your mom and I, your dad and I will be with you. You're not alone, but you've got to choose to fight. And Gordon, man, I'm telling you, in 1987, that served me well during 5 months in hospital. and during a couple of years of surgery and therapy that followed. But during a pandemic, it continues to serve me well. During crises and challenges we face as a family from time to time, financially from time to time, missing flights from time to time, the good old days, we still have to choose, how do we navigate the season that we are currently operating in? And we choose to own it, we choose to celebrate it, and we choose to fight forward with the hand of God in ours.
What are you telling yourself during this time that you told yourself back then?
I think I'm telling myself a little bit of something different now. What I'm telling myself is that we can choose to view this day as Groundhog Day. And on social media, I would imagine many of your listeners, and maybe you too, are seeing people posting the same picture, drinking wine, drinking beer, whatever it is, saying Groundhog Day number 64, 65, same miserable wall, 66, darn kids, I'm done homeschooling, 67. And they're complaining about how horrible this crisis is on them personally. What they miss in saying that, though, is the real joy of that movie Groundhog Day. What really took place in Phil Connor's life. That's the guy. Phil Connor is played perfectly by Bill Murray. So what happened in Groundhog Day? Yeah, he kept doing the same day again and again and again. But about halfway through, and this is what I'm telling myself during this pandemic, about halfway through, he made a decision to change the way he saw the day. And rather than complain about it, he started getting himself better in the middle of it. He learned French. He learned how to become an ice sculptor. He learned how to play the piano. He learned how to become a ballroom dancer. He learned, Gordon, when a kid was going to fall from a tree so he could be there to catch him. He learned when a guy at a restaurant was going to choke so he could be there to save his life. He learned the name of every single person in the town so he could be there to serve them. So instead of saying Groundhog Day sucks and it's making me worse and I can't wait for it to end, he used his pandemic experience to become a far better version of himself. So here's the thing. It's an inflection point in your life. We can try to get back to ordinary when that day comes, and none of us know when it will be. Or you can wake up to the gift of your life right now and become far better because of this day and because of the choices you make within this day.
So good, John. And you're someone who learned to play the piano. I saw a recent video of you playing the piano, but you don't have fingers. How did you do that?
And the blessing of having very difficult parents is they make you do things you don't think you can ever. And so my mom, the day I come home from hospital, she made me pick up a fork and I had no fingers. And I hated her because it took me 2 hours to get the first bite in my mouth. She ruined dinner, but she taught me how to eat. 3 days later, Gordon, I'm home, just minding my own business, 9-year-old kid wrapped like the Marshmallow Man head to toe. The doorbell rings and it's our piano teacher. My siblings are all in school. I know she's not there for me because John O'Leary's in a wheelchair on a morphine drip with no fingers. And I hated piano before I got burned. So I know she's not there for me. And my mother walks into the room where I'm seated. She doesn't say a word. I think there's wisdom in this. Sometimes we talk too much, myself included. She just humbly walks over to me. She unhooks the brakes of my wheelchair. And Gordon, we could talk all day about that one. Just unhooks the brakes of my wheelchair. Man, these limiting beliefs, rolls me away from that table, down a hallway, into a living room, locks the brakes in front of a piano and walks out. And the little man named John O'Leary, who had no business playing the piano ever again in his life, is learning how to play a song with one hand wrapped in the bandages and the other hand up in an airplane splint. And Gordon, the only time I hated Mom more than that day was the following Tuesday when Mrs. Bartello came back, and then the following and the following for 5 years of Tuesdays. And you asked the question, how'd you learn how to play? My mom insisted, and she insisted, and she insisted, and she insisted. And there came a point where I savored it, and I loved it, and I grew in it. And today, when you come visit me in St. Louis, you're my guest anytime. You'll find a guy who owns a piano who plays it every single night and generally plays it with a little kid seated to his left, man. So I love the piano. I love playing Coldplay. I love playing Amazing Grace. I love anything that turns on one of my kids to want to play with me. So I'm trying to learn all their songs today. Perfect by Ed Sheeran. Whatever they're into, that's what their daddy's into. But I love the piano today.
Are you ever surprised at the life you have with an amazing wife and children and just this incredible career, amazing speaker from where you came?
Man, I look at two things ground me every day. One is when I look in the mirror, all I see is scars in the morning. I mean, that's the reality. So you and I are looking at each other right now, and you see my smiling face, and it doesn't look like there's any burns on it. But if you could just look right below the neck, it's 100% down from there. And so my body's ravaged by these scars that have been there for 33 years. And I don't think they're ever going to go away this side of eternity. And so that's hard sometimes, but I look at it with a sense of profound gratitude that I'm alive. And so number one, I recognize the blessing of my life, and I beg your listeners and you, John, man, you're nothing but a miracle. Like your very life is nothing short of a grand gift. Don't wish away the day. Don't wish it was easier. Don't be bored by the mundane. Don't be angry at the difficult. Be in awe of everything. And so I try to look in the mirror and see that. That's number one. And the second thing is, I can't believe not only am I still alive, but I have the life I live. I'm an introvert by nature. I'm shy. I did poorly in school. And I've got 2 #1 national best-selling books out there. I struggle speaking, as you're hearing sometimes from time to time, even on this podcast. I pull the wrong words out frequently. I could never be a politician because I would look like a fool half the time. And yet somehow I do these stages where we're in front of a couple million people live. I'm married to the prettiest girl I've ever met. And somehow my wife, Beth, like you, Gordon, she gets younger every day, man. So I don't know how she does it. She gave me 4 kids. We're blessed in that. My mom and dad are alive still. I have 5 siblings and I have a relationship with all 5 of them. Like, dude, I feel like the luckiest, most blessed guy in any room I walk into. And on top of all of it, there's the promise of salvation looking forward. So yes, you said, do you look back at surprise at what you've done? Shocked. But I realize I haven't done it. I've just been part of it.
So good. Let's talk about your book, In Awe. Why'd you write it? Why did you call it that title?
So men like you, I have the blessing of traveling around the world, speaking to these large organizations and big auditoriums. And frequently when you're walking through life, you see adults who look a little beat down by life. You see them in the airports, you see them in the hotels, you see them in the conference centers, you see them in the boardrooms, you see them at the coffee shops, you see them at church and synagogues. They're just kind of, they're just grinding through the misery of the day, man. 7 more months until vacation. You know, like that's kind of how we go through this stuff. And then I would leave these conference centers and I would walk into a school building. So when I'm on the road, I like to speak at a big organization for, that's part of the revenue stream. It's part of the work we do and part of the mission. But the other side of that is to give back. And so we always make a habit of speaking in front of organization, little kids, speaking in front of the school buildings. And I'm always amazed, John, by the joy of the classroom. These little kids, they don't walk in, they skip into the auditorium. They do something that adults seldom do, man. They have a goofy grin on their face the entire time. They turn to their neighbor and they share honestly. When you ask them questions, every single hand goes up. Every hand goes up, man, right away. Sometimes before you're even done asking the question, they somehow already know what you're going to ask and they get it wrong, but they're participating. When you ask them how many of them are artists, everybody's an artist. When you ask them how many of you are optimistic about tomorrow, all of them are optimistic about tomorrow. We as a nation, the United States, have had 6 consecutive years of pessimism. 94% of news stories last year were negative. So we adults are seeing the world through one lens, and then our kids are seeing it through a completely different lens, the same lens that we used to see through. We used to be them. So the book is this: what is it that they have? Why do we lose that, and how do we return to it? And in doing so, how might that change your marriage? How might it affect your singleness? How might it allow you to become a better entrepreneur, a better leader, a better servant going forward? How might it change not only your world, but the entire world?
When did that book come out?
It came out last Tuesday.
Last Tuesday. Going well?
Oh, man. I mean, so I hold everything with my hands wide open. Like you never know what's going to happen. So stop pretending like you do. But we've been amazed at the amount of orders that have been placed, at the trend line moving forward upward still, at the responses through social media and on Amazon and all the other organizations that are purchasing this book. It's the idea is not numbers. We track. I'm a business owner. You got to track that. It's impact. And man, we want to impact people not only to be motivated while they read a book. That's the lowest common denominator. It better do that. It's ultimately, is it going to impact you after you're done reading it? Will it impact your marriage? Will it impact the way you operate? Will it impact the way you go through life? And the cool thing that we're already beginning to see one week in is that it already is. And now we're trying to build a whole momentum and a whole movement around that.
What would you say to the people that are going through the COVID-19? They're dealing with the challenges of it. Maybe they're a frontline health worker, maybe they're in New York City right now and they're seeing all this devastation. They say, John, yeah, it's easy to be in awe, but you don't know the life that I'm living right now. Those are the kind of questions I get sometimes when I talk about positivity, right? How can I be positive when I'm going through this? What would you say?
So the beautiful thing about coming at this story, this lens of positivity, when you have been ravaged by a fire, is you can actually say these words and mean it. Me too. Me too. When you lose 94% of your future revenue in March and people are complaining about their financial peace, you can say, me too. So what am I trying to do? Number one, give myself permission to be a little upset, a little angry, a little sad by where things are and where things continue to be. I'm okay with a little bit of sadness. I don't need to be positive, John, all the time, and neither do you. But the idea is you don't have to stay in your sorrows long term. You don't have to remain in the rut. So I have the pity party, and then I leave the table and I move forward. So that's one piece. I'm okay being upset, and I'm okay with every one of your listeners being upset when they turn on the news or they put on their mask or they can't return to their job or they're struggling financially. It is okay to be upset. That's number one. You got to be honest with where you are. That's the second piece. The second piece is awareness. And then the third is, where do you want to go? Where do you want to go? And for me, it's not only a direction, it's the pathway. So here's what, organizationally, John, the most important job title I have currently is dad. And my kids, I'm sharing with them very publicly at home how we're doing in our business, how we're doing in our finances. And I wanted them to see a dad who not only endured this season with grace, but also with generosity. We give when the sun is shining. And I love showing my kids, man, to those who receive much, you got to give back, kids. Watch dad. This is how we do it. But this is a different season. And it's much easier to build walls. And I refuse to. I'm just not going to do it. So what we did is we gave away all pre-sales in the first week of sales for the book In Awe to my favorite organization. They're called Big Brothers Big Sisters. So we sold 14,000 books or something, which would have helped our organization and my family a lot, man. But it's going to help kids in our community a lot more than it would have helped us. So all of that to say this, it's okay to be mad, but you can't live there. It's okay to have some awareness because that's the next critical step of where you are, where you've been and where you want to go. But rather than wait for the seasons to change, man, become the weatherman. Blow out those clouds, raise the mask high, get the sail up there and move into the unknown with confidence. Show others around you that the best days are still in front of us, but they start now. We're not waiting for it. It starts right now.
That's awesome, John. When you were younger, a famous figure had an impact on your life when you were that kid who needed help. Talk about that.
Yeah, my mom. So, I'm joking. So my mom is my famous figure. She was the one I brought in for the book launch. We have access, not to Matthew McConaughey and other guys like that. I'm telling you that right now, Gordon, but I had access to a whole lot of heroes of mine. And the one that I wanted brought in was my mom. So she was the one I interviewed for our book launch. She was my very first podcast. I want people to realize heroes sometimes make the most money. They sometimes climb the tallest mountains. They sometimes are the finest actors and sometimes in Lincoln commercials. That's sometimes true, but sometimes they're just humble servants. They're nurses, they're custodial workers, they're parents. And so my mom is my hero. My father is tied for first place. And the other one you mentioned is a guy named Jack Buck. Some of your listeners may not know Jack Buck, but I bet you know the name Joe Buck. Joe is a celebrity. Joe's called 26 consecutive World Series. So Joe's awesome. He's a friend and I love him. But I loved his dad. His dad was my hero. And I never met him. I'm a normal middle-class Midwestern citizen, but I loved the team he broadcast for, the St. Louis Cardinals. I got burned on a Saturday morning in January. It's January 17th. That was my date. And on the 18th, I'm tied down in a hospital bed in darkness. My eyes won't open. The bandages wrap my body from head to toe. I'm in intense pain, tied down, can't communicate because there's a trach. You hear about these respirators. Man, there's a respirator forcing air into my lungs. But I could hear, and I heard the footsteps. Somebody wearing dress shoes. I'll never forget it. I hear a chair come across the floor. And then I hear the voice of the celebrity radio announcer speaking light into my darkness, speaking positivity and love into a very difficult situation. And what Jack Buck said that day was, kid, deep smoker's voice, kid, wake up. You are going to live. You are going to survive. And when you get out of here, we are going to celebrate. We'll call it John O'Leary Day at the ballpark. And then he asked a question, and the question was, kid, are you listening? So I tried to nod my head, and the old man said back, good, keep fighting. And John, he was told when he walked out that day that there was utterly no chance of John O'Leary surviving even that next night. And when people tell you there's no chance of a better life, when they tell you you were just born that way, you don't have the goods, when they tell you your financial picture is always the way it's been and it's never going to improve, that's just the way you are, man. I've always been a negative person. How often do you hear that one, John? I don't ever see the glass half full. Well, Jack was told that there was no chance to make the situation better. And we've been told that, man, in COVID-19, with a recession, with a global pandemic, with whatever you want to talk about being wrong. But the thing needs redeeming. And Jack worked to make it so. Jack went home that night, asked the question, what more can I do? Which is by far my favorite question still. I learned it from him. But the question he asked nightly was, what more can I do? And the following day, he shows back up in my life, whispers encouragement back into my darkness and says, kid, wake up, I'm back. So John, long story made much shorter. He came into my life every day over the next 5 months, encouraging a hopeless situation to dream, to move, to pray, to fight forward.
And what was it like when you actually went to the ballpark and stuff?
So, man, I mean, come on. I'm now 10. I'm still in a wheelchair. I'm still wrapped with bandages on about half my body, but it's awesome. I'm being pushed around a stadium by Jack Buck. And I believe you're a Yankees fan. Is that right?
I grew up a Yankees fan, but now I root for other teams.
All right, man. So you grew up a Yankees fan. So you picked the old Yankees announcer, your Dodgers fans out there. Just imagine like the biggest role model you had now pushing you in your wheelchair and now introducing you to the ball players that you look up to. You want to be just like them when you get out of the stupid wheelchair because you still dream of playing baseball someday. So Jack introduces me to these heroes of mine. He learns that night that I can't hold anything in my hands. I don't have fingers. They haven't grown back. And rather than just seeing a broken kid, the following day, he sends me a baseball signed by a Cardinal great named Ozzie Smith. And below that ball was a note from Jack that said, kid, if you want a second baseball, you got to write a thank you letter to the guy who signed the first. And John, although I had not yet written a note, that was the encouragement I needed. To pick up a pen with the help of my mom and dad, push my hands together. We wrote a note to Mr. Smith, mailed it off, and a couple days later, Jack sent a second baseball with a second note that read, kid, if you want a third baseball. And about 65 days later, a little boy with no chance at life received 60 baseballs, teaching that same little fella how to stop making excuses, how to pick up a pen, how to learn how to write, which freed me to go back to grade school in time. Changed my world.
Unbelievable. And folks, this is why you don't want to follow John O'Leary at a conference speaking, because he shares that story. And then he plays the piano with no fingers. And you just can't follow that. And John, I know we're laughing about that, but you are incredible. I love your story. I'm in awe of you. So thanks so much for being on Positive University and for living the life that you live and for being the inspiration for all of us.
Man, let me tell you this. When you say that, every book that we ever print has no picture of me on the front or back of it. Every time I speak, I have very few pictures of me actually on the PowerPoint. And in addition to all that, I hate the word I. So in newsletters and all, I just don't like this stuff, man. This is not about me. This is how people, leaders, positive influencers, God has shown up in a mighty way in my life as a child and now as a man. And if that happens to you, and I believe it's happened to all of you, if you have ears to hear this podcast, it has happened to you. And then your calling as a leader is to reach back out to those who could use some encouragement, could use a little bit of inspiration, and use an opportunity that we can provide them to take the next step forward in their journey. So guys, listen, if you are enjoying this journey, we have a 21-day challenge set up right now. It's at our website called readinawe.com. And it's just a gift. But the idea is, how do you stay on fire with hope? How do you stay in awe of life? So go to readinawe.com and let's journey together, because I'm convinced you are not alone. You are a gift and your best days are in front of you.
Thank you, John. I appreciate you so much.
I love you, man. Thanks, John.
Love you too.